Mindanao, the Philippines, September 1902. The jungle is a wall of green steam. An American corporal sees a shadow move in the brush. A Moro warrior emerges. The warrior is charging. He is carrying a heavy blade. The corporal pulls the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. 6 shots of .38 caliber lead hit the warrior's center mass. All hits. The warrior doesn't fall. He doesn't even slow down. The soldier is dead seconds later. His throat is cut. His empty revolver is still gripped in his hand. Reinforcements find the body. They count the wounds. 6 holes are in the enemy's chest. None of them stopped the charge. The scene repeats across the islands. American soldiers are dying. Their modern weapons are failing where it matters most. They didn't need a better soldier. They needed a bigger hammer. They needed a weapon that cost $15 to build but could drop a man in one shot. This is the story of the M1911, the gun that was too simple to fail and too powerful to die. The Philippine-American War was a brutal awakening for the U.S. Army. It was 1902 in the dense jungles of Mindanao. American soldiers were facing a new kind of terror, the Moro warriors. These were indigenous fighters who had spent 4 centuries resisting Spanish conquest. Now, they were turning their blades toward the Americans. The Moros were masters of guerrilla warfare. They did not fight like the conventional armies of Europe. They used the terrain. They used the fog. They used the silence of the trees. But it was their physical resilience that haunted the American infantry. Before battle, many Moros would undergo a ritual of juramentado. They bound their limbs with leather thongs to prevent blood loss from minor wounds. They consumed drugs that numbed pain and induced a state of religious frenzy. They wore armor crafted from water buffalo horn and brass plates. These plates were connected with hand-woven chainmail. When these warriors charged, they did not stop for anything. The standard-issue sidearm for American officers at the time was the Model 1892 revolver. It was a modern weapon for its day. It was sleek and accurate. It fired the .38 long Colt cartridge. This was a high-velocity, small-bore round. On a paper target, the .38 was superior to older, heavier bullets. It was easier to shoot. It had less recoil. But in the humidity of Mindanao, paper statistics meant nothing. The .38 long Colt lacked kinetic energy. It produced roughly 160 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. A single bullet would pass through a charging Moro without expanding. It left a small, clean hole. Unless the bullet hit the brain of the central nervous system, the warrior felt nothing. The adrenaline and the drugs kept his heart beating. The leather bindings kept his muscles moving. Reports began to flood the desk of General William Crozier, the chief of ordnance in Washington. One report described an American corporal firing all 6 rounds into an attacker's chest. The distance was less than 20 feet. The Moro warrior continued his charge. He decapitated the corporal with a barong, a heavy, leaf-shaped blade. When the corporal's squad finally killed the warrior, they found all 6 bullets had hit vital organs. The .38 caliber had failed to stop the threat. It lacked the hydrostatic shock necessary to drop a determined human being. This was not just a mechanical failure. It was a crisis of confidence. Soldiers began to lose faith in their equipment. They started digging through old supply crates. They were looking for the Model 1873 single-action Army revolvers. These were the old peacemakers from the Indian Wars. They were slow to load. They were heavy, but they fired the .45 Colt round. The .45 caliber bullet weighed 250 grains. It was a massive chunk of lead moving at a lower speed. It delivered 400 foot-pounds of energy. When a .45 hit a target, the energy transfer was devastating. It was the difference between a needle and a sledgehammer. General Crozier knew he could not send the Army back to the 19th century. He could not issue single-action revolvers in a world of semi-automatic fire. The Germans were developing the Luger. The British were testing the Webley. The Americans needed a modern weapon with the power of the old frontier. Crozier authorized the Thompson-Lagarde test in 1904. This was a scientific autopsy of stopping power. It took place at the Nelson Morris Company stockyards in Chicago. Colonel John T. Thompson and Major Louis Anatole Lagarde were the leads. The methodology was gruesome. They fired different calibers into live cattle. They measured how many shots it took to drop the animals. They fired into human cadavers suspended from the ceiling. They measured the swing of the body to determine kinetic impact. This was the birth of modern ballistics. They tested the .38, the 9mm, the .45, and even at .476 caliber. The results were undeniable. The small, fast bullets like the 9mm and the .38 zipped through the targets. They did minimal structural damage. The large, slow bullets like the .45 crushed bone and tore tissue. The final report was written in blunt military prose. It stated that a bullet which will have the shock effect must be not less than .45 caliber. The Ordnance Department issued a new set of requirements. They wanted a semi-automatic pistol. It had to be chambered in a .45 caliber cartridge. It had to be magazine-fed. It had to be reliable in the worst conditions imaginable. The competition was set. The prize was the contract for the U.S. military. Many companies entered. Savage Arms brought a complex, rotating barrel design. Luger submitted a version of their toggle-lock pistol. But in Ogden, Utah, one man was already ahead of the curve. John Moses Browning had been experimenting with recoil-operated systems since the 1890s. He didn't just want to build a gun. He wanted to build a system that used its own energy to fight. He understood that complexity was the enemy of the soldier. He was about to take the sledgehammer of the .45 and put it into a machine that could fire as fast as a finger could twitch. The failure of the .38 in the Philippine mud had set the stage. The prophet of Ogden was ready to step onto it. The legend of the $15 gun was about to be forged in steel. John Moses Browning was not a soldier. He was a mechanical genius. He was born in 1855 in Ogden, Utah. He grew up in his father's gunsmith shop. By age 13, he had built his first functional rifle from scrap metal. Browning did not just study guns. He understood the physics of wasted energy. In the late 1890s, most firearms were manual. You worked a lever. You turned a bolt. You cocked a hammer. Browning watched the tall grass blast away from the muzzle of a rifle. He realized that the escaping gas and the kick of the recoil were untapped power. He wanted to harness that energy to do the work of the soldier. He began experimenting with self-loading mechanisms. His early designs were radical. Some used gas tapped from the barrel. Others used the entire movement of the barrel to cycle the action. By 1900, he perfected the short recoil operation. This would become the heart of the most famous pistol in history. It is a locked breech design. It is simple. It is robust. The system works on a principle of shared momentum. The barrel and the slide are locked together by heavy steel ribs. When the gun fires, the pressure pushes them both backward. They travel together for about a quarter of an inch. Then, a small swinging link pulls the rear of the barrel down. The barrel stops. The slide continues. It ejects the empty brass. It compresses a heavy spring. The spring then slams the slide forward. It strips a fresh round from the magazine. It shoves it into the chamber. It locks the barrel back into place. This happens in a fraction of a second. While the Army struggled in the Philippines, Browning was refining the system with the Colts Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company. He knew the Army wanted a .45 caliber. Browning did not just scale up a smaller gun. He designed a new cartridge from the ground up. He called it the .45 ACP, Automatic Colt Pistol. The specifications were precise. The bullet weighed 230 grains. It was a massive, rounded slug of lead and copper. It traveled at 850 feet per second. This speed is subsonic. It reduces wear on the barrel. It produces a heavy, manageable push rather than a sharp snap. Most importantly, it delivered the kinetic impact the Army demanded. In 1905, Browning produced the Colt Model 1905. It was the first semi-automatic pistol chambered in .45 ACP. It was a massive, blocky machine. It was the missing link between the frontier and the modern age. The Army began testing the 1905. They liked the power. They liked the speed. But they had concerns about safety. The U.S. cavalry was still a major force. Soldiers on horseback had to manage a set of reins and a weapon at the same time. If a horse bucked, a soldier might drop his pistol. Browning went back to his bench. He added a grip safety. This was a lever built into the back of the handle. The gun cannot fire unless the shooter is squeezing the grip. He added a manual thumb safety as well. He added a slide stop that locked the gun open after the last shot. This gave the soldier an immediate visual signal that he was out of ammunition. Browning simplified the entire internal structure. He reduced the number of pins and springs. He made the weapon easy to take apart without tools. He made it soldier-proof. By 1906, the design was maturing. It was no longer just a collection of parts. It was a unified system of combat. It was heavy, weighing nearly 3 pounds when loaded. It felt like a tool. It was balanced. It pointed naturally, like an extension of the shooter's hand. The Army was impressed, but they were not ready to sign a contract. They had been burned by the .38 caliber failure. They wanted proof. They set up a competition. It would be a trial by fire. Only the strongest machine would survive. The stage was set for the legendary 1911 trials. The prophet of Ogden was about to put his masterpiece into the hands of the skeptics. The U.S. Army was done with theories. They wanted to see a machine break. In March 1911, the final trials began at the Springfield Armory. 2 finalists remained. One was the Savage Arms design. The other was the Browning-designed Colt. Both were chambered in the massive .45 ACP. The rules were brutal. Each pistol had to fire 6,000 rounds. This was an astronomical number for the time. Most pistols of that era failed before reaching 1,000. The test was designed to simulate years of combat in just a few days. The guns were not cleaned. They were only oiled at specific intervals. If a part broke, the company could replace it, but the failure would be noted. The firing began. The air in the armory turned thick with the smell of burnt cordite. The shooters fired in rapid bursts. The heat was the first enemy. After 100 rounds, the barrels were too hot to touch. The steel expanded. The Savage pistol began to struggle. It suffered from jams. It had misfires. Parts inside the mechanism began to crack under the stress. By the end of the trial, the Savage had recorded 37 malfunctions. In a life-or-death situation, that is 37 opportunities to die. John Moses Browning was there in person. He watched his creation with absolute calm. The Colt pistol was performing differently. It cycled with the rhythm of a sewing machine. Round after round, it spat out the heavy .45 brass. The barrel grew so hot, it began to smoke. Browning did not panic. He simply asked for a bucket of cold water. He dunked the entire pistol into the water to cool the steel. Then he pulled it out, wiped it down, and told the testers to keep firing. This was a nightmare for metal tolerances. The sudden change from extreme heat to ice-cold water should have warped the frame. It should have cracked the slide. The Colt did not care. It kept firing. When the 6,000th round was spent, the testers stopped. They looked at the logs. The Colt had recorded 0 malfunctions. It was a perfect score. The military observers were stunned. They had never seen a mechanical device perform with such total reliability. They took the pistol apart. They inspected the lugs. They checked the springs. The wear was minimal. The design was essentially indestructible. On March 29, 1911, the decision was made official. The Army adopted the weapon as the automatic pistol caliber .45, model of 1911. The Navy and the Marine Corps followed shortly after. The price was set at approximately $14.50 per unit for the initial contracts. For less than $15, the United States had purchased the most reliable combat tool ever made. It was a slab of steel that could survive mud, ice, and fire. It delivered a bullet that could stop a charging enemy in a single hit. Browning had delivered on his promise. He had given the soldier a weapon that was as tough as the man carrying it. But a test on a range is one thing. A test in the mud of a world war is another. The M1911 was about to meet its first true test in the hands of a marksman from Tennessee. The legend of Hill 223 was coming. October 8, 1918. The Argonne Forest, France. The air is a thick soup of fog, cordite, and decaying leaves. Corporal Alvin York is a man from the mountains of Tennessee. He grew up hunting turkeys to feed his family. He knows how to wait. He knows how to breathe. He is part of a 17-man squad from the 82nd Infantry Division. Their mission is to silence German machine guns pinning down their regiment near Hill 223. The squad is ambushed. Within seconds, 9 Americans are down. York is suddenly in command of the survivors. He drops to the prone position. He is armed with an M1903 Springfield rifle. He begins to pick off the German gunners, one by one. His accuracy is terrifying. Every time a German head pops up above a trench, York pulls the trigger. He does not miss. The German commander realizes a single marksman is dismantling his line. He orders a bayonet charge to overrun York's position. 6 German soldiers leap from the trench. They fix their long blades. They scream as they charge through the brush. York's rifle is empty. There is no time to work the bolt. There is no time to reload a 5-round clip. The Germans are less than 20 yards away. They are closing the gap in seconds. York reaches for his hip. He draws his M1911 pistol. He remembers his training in the mountains. When hunting wild turkeys, you never shoot the lead bird first. If you shoot the leader, the others scatter. If you shoot the one in the back, the others keep coming. They don't realize their numbers are shrinking. York begins to fire. He shoots the 6th man in the line, then the 5th, then the 4th. The 45 ACP rounds hit like sledgehammers. The Germans do not stumble or crawl. They are dropped instantly. The last German is the officer leading the charge. He is only feet away when York pulls the trigger for the final time. The officer falls. The charge is broken. The M1911 has fired 6 rounds in a matter of seconds. It did not jam. It did not fail. York does not stop. He turns his pistol toward the German trench. He demands their surrender. The German lieutenant, seeing the pile of bodies, believes he is facing an entire platoon. He blows his whistle and orders his men to lay down their arms. By the time York reaches American lines, he is leading 132 German prisoners. He has single-handedly silenced 35 machine guns. York becomes a national hero. He receives the Medal of Honor. When asked how he survived, he credits his faith and his tools. Critics later doubted the turkey hunting story. They thought it was wartime propaganda. In 2006, a team of forensic archaeologists located the exact site of the fight. They used metal detectors to scan the soil of Hill 223. They found the evidence. They recovered 46 empty rifle casings from York's Springfield. More importantly, they found 23 empty .45 ACP casings. These were clustered exactly where York had made his stand. The ballistic markings confirmed they came from a single Colt M1911. The turkey tactic was real. The pistol had functioned perfectly in the mud of the forest. The story of Alvin York spread through the American Expeditionary Force. Soldiers who doubted the new automatic became believers. The M1911 was no longer just a piece of hardware. It was a lifesaver. It was the weapon you drew when everything else went wrong. As the war ended, the military realized they had the perfect sidearm, but they also found room for improvement. The world was entering a new era of manufacturing. The $15 gun was about to become an industrial miracle. After World War I, the U.S. Army conducted a massive review of its equipment. They looked at the battlefield feedback from France. The M1911 was a success, but it was not perfect. Soldiers reported several ergonomic issues. The primary complaint was hammer bite. During recoil, the hammer spur would pinch the web of the shooter's hand. The grip safety tang was too short to prevent this. The trigger was also too long for men with smaller hands. The sights were another issue. They were thin and difficult to see in the low light of a trench. In 1924, the Army officially updated the design. It was designated the M1911A1. The modifications were subtle, but effective. They shortened the trigger. They added an arched mainspring housing to the back of the grip. This change pushed the shooter's palm forward and improved the point ability of the pistol. They lengthened the grip safety tang. They widened the front sight. These changes refined the weapon for the next generation of soldiers. Then came December 1941. The world went to war again. The U.S. Army faced a supply crisis. They needed millions of sidearms. Colt held the primary patents, but Colt's factory was already at maximum capacity. They were building machine guns and revolvers. The government had to look elsewhere. They turned to civilian industry. This became known as the arsenal of democracy. They approached companies that had never built a firearm in their history. Remington Rand was a typewriter company. They had no experience with ballistics. Yet, they became the largest producer of the M1911A1 in history. They manufactured approximately 900,000 units. Their pistols were exceptional. They mastered the mass production of precision steel parts. The Ithaca Gun Company joined the effort. They produced 335,000 pistols. Union Switch and Signal was a manufacturer of railroad equipment. They produced 55,000 units. Collectors now considered the Union Switch and Signal pistols to be among the highest quality ever made. Even the Singer Sewing Machine Company received a contract. It was an educational order. They built only 500 pistols. The goal was to see if a sewing machine factory could meet military tolerances. They succeeded. Today, a Singer 1911 is a holy grail for collectors. One can sell for over $100,000 at auction. The true miracle was the interchangeability of parts. A slide from a Remington Rand would fit a frame from an Ithaca. A barrel from a Colt would fit a Singer. Manufacturing speed was prioritized. The elegant blue finish of the early 1911s was abandoned. It was replaced with parkerizing. This was a matte gray phosphate coating. It was faster to apply. It held oil better. It resisted the salt air of the Pacific and the mud of Europe. The cost remained staggeringly low. Depending on the volume of the contract, the government paid between $15 and $24 per unit. By the end of 1945, nearly 1.9 million M1911A1s had been produced for the war effort. These pistols were ubiquitous. They were carried by paratroopers jumping into Normandy. They were in the shoulder holsters of pistols over Tokyo. They were on the hips of Marines on Iwo Jima. The typewriter and the sewing machine had built the tool of liberation. But the M1911 was about to face a different kind of conflict. It was going into the dark. It was going into the tunnels. The 1950s and 60s took the M1911 into the most extreme environments on Earth. In Korea, the weapon faced sub-zero temperatures. At the Chosin Reservoir, the cold was so intense that the oil inside most weapons froze solid. Soldiers found that the M1911 still cycled. Its loose tolerances, designed by Browning for reliability, allowed the metal to move even when coated in frost. It became a trusted companion for men fighting in frozen foxholes. Then came Vietnam. The war moved from frozen mountains to steaming jungles. The M1911 found a new, terrifying role. It became the primary weapon of the tunnel rats. These were specialist soldiers. They volunteered to crawl into the vast underground complexes of the Viet Cong. These tunnels were narrow and pitch black. They were filled with booby traps, scorpions, and armed enemies. A rifle was useless in a tunnel. It was too long to turn into the cramped spaces. The muzzle blast in a confined area was deafening. The tunnel rats carried a flashlight and an M1911. They preferred the .45 because of its massive stopping power. In a tunnel, you often only had one chance to fire. There was no room for a second shot. The heavy .45 ACP round would drop an enemy instantly. It also had a lower risk of overpenetration in the tight dirt walls. The soldiers trusted the thump of the .45 to end a fight before it started. By the late 1970s, the M1911 was aging. Many of the pistols in the inventory were decades old. They had been rebuilt and refinished multiple times. Parts were becoming worn. The U.S. government faced political pressure. NATO allies were moving to the 9mm parabellum round. The goal was standardization across all Western armies. The 9mm was a smaller, faster round. It allowed for high-capacity magazines. A modern 9mm pistol could hold 15 rounds. The M1911 only held 7. In 1985, the unthinkable happened. The U.S. military officially retired the M1911. They adopted the Beretta 92F, designated as the M9. To the bureaucrats, it was a logical choice. The 9mm was lighter. It had less recoil. It was easier for new recruits to shoot accurately. It shared ammunition with European allies. But to the veterans and the elite units, it was a mistake. They felt the 9mm lacked the one-shot authority of the .45. They preferred the heavy steel frame over the aluminum and plastic of newer designs. The M1911 was supposed to disappear into museums. It was supposed to be a relic of the past. Instead, it went underground. It moved into the holsters of the most secretive units in the military. The steel versus plastic debate was just beginning. The Beretta M9 was the new king of the armory, but in the shadows of the military, the M1911 never left. Special operations units looked at the 15-round 9mm magazine. Then they looked at the stopping power of the .45 ACP. They chose the power. Delta Force was formed in 1977. Its founder, Colonel Charles Beckwith, was a veteran of the SAS. He understood that in a hostage rescue, you don't want a bullet that passes through a wall. You want a bullet that stops the threat instantly. Delta operators were issued M1911A1s from old government stocks, but these were not standard pistols. The unit armorers at Fort Bragg dismantled them. They rebuilt them from the frame up. They added match-grade barrels. They installed flared magazine wells for faster reloads. They added beaver tail grip safeties to eliminate hammerbite forever. These pistols were capable of sub-2-inch groups at 25 yards. They were the most accurate handguns in the world. Marine Force Recon followed the same path. They created the MEU SOC pistol. It was a hand-built M1911A1 using Springfield Armory or Caspian frames. The Marines realized that in the chaos of a shipboarding, a heavy steel pistol was a primary weapon. It was reliable. It was devastating. It was a statement. The FBI Hostage Rescue Team, HRT, also rejected the high-capacity trend. In the 1990s, they awarded a contract to Springfield Armory for a specialized 1911. It was called the professional model. It was built to fire tens of thousands of rounds without a single malfunction. The operators preferred the single-action trigger. A standard 9mm Beretta has a double-action first pull. It is long and heavy. The M1911 trigger is a short, crisp, glass rod break. It is always the same. The consistency allows for extreme speed and precision under life or death stress. By the early 2000s, the retired gun was everywhere in the War on Terror. Navy SEALs used them for specialized maritime operations. Army Special Forces carried them in the mountains of Tora Bora. The $15 gun had become a $2,000 custom instrument. But beneath the tactical lights and the laser-etched logos, it was still John Browning's machine. It still used the same swinging link. It still used the same recoil spring. The elite units proved that capacity is a luxury, but reliability and power are necessities. The M1911 was no longer just a pistol. It was a badge of the professional. But what was it about the physical design that made it so perfect? It wasn't just the caliber. It was the mechanical zen of the frame itself. John Browning understood human anatomy as well as he understood steel. The M1911 features a 17.5-degree grip angle. This is not an arbitrary number. It is the natural point of the human hand. When you raise the pistol, the sights align with the eye instinctively. You do not have to fight the weapon to find the target. The trigger is the second secret. Most modern pistols use a hinged trigger. It pivots on a pin. The M1911 trigger is a sliding trigger. It moves straight back on a track. This prevents the shooter from pulling the gun to the left or right. It results in a clean, consistent break of about 4 to 5 pounds. The weight of the gun is another advantage. A loaded M1911 weighs approximately 3 pounds. This heavy steel frame absorbs the recoil of the .45 ACP. It turns a violent explosion into a steady, rearward push. This allows the shooter to get back on target faster than with a lighter, plastic frame 9mm. Browning also utilized a low-bore axis. The barrel sits close to the shooter's hand. This reduces muzzle flip. The energy of the shot goes into the arm rather than snapping the wrist upward. The ergonomics were so perfect in 1911 that they have never been surpassed. Modern manufacturers spend millions on research and development. They still cannot beat the feel of a century-old design. The M1911 has fought in every major American conflict for 114 years. It has seen the mud of the Somme and the sands of Iraq. It has outlasted the M1 Garand, the M14, and the original M16. In 2012, the Marine Corps awarded a $22.5 million contract to Colt. They wanted 12,000 new pistols for their elite units. The weapon was designated the M45A1. It featured a desert tan finish and an accessory rail for lights, but the internal heart was identical to the 1911 model. Today, the patent has expired. The design is in the public domain. Nearly every major firearms company in the world produces a 1911 variant. Sig Sauer, Smith & Wesson, and Springfield Armory all have versions on the market. Over 2.7 million were produced for the military. Millions more have been sold to civilians. In 2011, Utah named the Browning M1911 its official state firearm. It remains a staple of competitive shooting. It is a favorite for home defense. The M1911 was born from a failure in the Philippine jungle. It was refined in a Utah workshop. It was proven on the battlefields of Europe. It survived the transition from horses to jet engines. It survived the move from steel to polymer. It is the gun that refused to retire. It is the $15 tool that became a national icon. John Moses Browning created more than a weapon. He created a standard of reliability that defined American military power. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the legendary 1911, hit the like button and subscribe. Leave a comment below. If you were heading into a tunnel today, would you choose a modern 9mm or the classic .45? Thanks for watching.